Do you remember when weather was boring? Today, not so much. It seems like every time you turn around, some record or another is being broken. Maybe this doesn't seem like a big deal. After all, there are still tornadoes where there have always been tornadoes. There are still hurricanes where there have always been hurricanes. That's not new either. What is new is the frequency and the intensity, and the fact that major weather events now seem to be showing up totally in new locations. That's what is new. Why does this even matter? Perhaps because so many different things are starting to happen. Intense heat waves up to 130 degrees and beyond that can kill people outright. Unusual heat waves are now starting to show up in regions with historically cool climates, like British Columbia and the Pacific Northwest. Washington State gets plenty of rain in the winter, but 14 inches in just one day in mid-December? Now that's worth paying attention to. Since the 1970s, hurricanes and other extreme cyclonic storms have demonstrated overall increases in intensity, rapid increases in strength, total rainfall amounts, and storm surges. Now they are even starting to form lines, waiting for their turn to bash the coast. There are now droughts that never really go away, cold waves that shut down whole regions for weeks or even months, dust storms that turn the sky red, massive wildfires that are not just someplace out in the backcountry. They are now starting to wipe out sections of major population centers. I invite you to notice just how frequently this is starting to happen, how it seems to be creeping into our daily lives as if this is normal. It is not normal, and it is definitely going in a direction that is not good. There is so much going on everywhere, constantly, and yet we know so little. Instead, our legacy media, if they mention these events at all, portray them as random curiosities, as if you should be consuming the news along with a bag of popcorn. Admittedly, not every story qualifies as a headline weather disaster, but there are scientific studies and papers being published every day that are constantly exposing disturbing and even alarming trends that somehow are never mentioned in public media or governmental informational outlets, much less being addressed in legislative committee hearings. Why is it that we hear almost nothing about the urgency of the situation? Legacy media, which are quick to market themselves as highly principled sources of crucial information that address matters of broad public concern, are more likely avoiding anything that would disturb the status quo or their business model. Survival for them has a different connotation than for the general population. Nonetheless, signs that things are amiss are becoming harder and harder to suppress. Little things that suggest a trend which, if it continues unchecked, could lead to some really big problems. Little things like incremental increases in average global temperature, incremental increases in sea level, incremental increases in thawing of sea ice and Arctic permafrost, spreading evidence of dying coral reefs, 90% decreases in fishing stocks and other sea life in the last 2 centuries, and greenhouse gases nearly doubling in the last century. These are the trends that are obvious, but they do not begin to address the unknown factors that still await us. 2 examples from the world's oceans show just how profound our true lack of understanding is at present. In the first example, recent discoveries reveal that warm water is upwelling off the coast of Antarctica for unknown reasons in a location that is completely unexpected, leading to a potential permanent loss of Antarctic sea ice in the next 10 to 15 years. What is causing it and the possible connection with global ocean current patterns is still unknown. Another recent study suggests that the growth of phytoplankton in the ocean is decreasing across vast areas of the globe, contrary to the current assumptions about the growth presumably caused by increases in ocean temperatures. The exact causes and how widespread is the occurrence of this phenomenon is still unknown. Given that 3/4 of the planet is covered by ocean, which constantly and dynamically interacts with the Earth's atmosphere, our ability to be blindsided by bad news from this region is frightening. Right now is the time to start paying attention.
Have you, by any chance, noticed the recent increase in a number of things like extreme temperatures, catastrophic weather events, rising ocean levels, discoveries of more and more forever chemicals and nanoplastics spreading in the environment and in our bodies? This is not your imagination or just media hype. It is quite real, and you are not just an observer. You're a target. Actually, time is not on your side, and if you don't take effective action, you will become a statistic. Nor can you simply go someplace else. In the end, there is no escape. There is no planet B. There's only planet A.
Welcome to Planet A, and thank you for being here. My name is Pete Peterson, and I will be your host. What you are viewing is the premiere episode of a YouTube channel that is dedicated to finding out the root causes of what seems to be a definite increase in weather-related events, which have been showing up recently in the news media. More and more seemingly disconnected stories about natural events, but which are now actually beginning to disrupt our daily lives, our health, our loved ones, and our communities. Beyond the root causes, I also aim to explore the implications of what we are now beginning to see and what, if anything, can be done about it. Just exactly what is the degree of urgency and what options are available. I am an environmental attorney with a passion for informing and inspiring community-driven change. Since the mid-1980s, my practice has been focused on enforcement of environmental laws for state environmental agencies. Most of my experience has been in the field of regulation of the use and disposition of hazardous waste, and also with the cleanup of hazardous substances at federal and state Superfund sites. I have learned firsthand about how serious and persistent problems can arise when our culture implements widespread practices without having the slightest clue or concern about potential adverse consequences. Currently, I am devoted to uncovering and making available to everyone fact-based information on the extent and seriousness of environment-based threats that all of humanity is now confronted with, the urgency with which we must begin taking effective action, and the likelihood of success or failure of various solutions that are being put in place or which may be proposed in the future. Since I am an attorney and not a scientist, it is not my intention to be developing and publishing original scientific material. But I can share what is already known and supported by evidence, what is being investigated, and who is taking action. If you are watching this, then perhaps you have recognized what many of us ignore, that we are here on planet Earth. Our nearest neighbor is so far away that it does not exist for us as a reality. Being here is such a dominant factor in our experience of life that we automatically default to focusing our attention elsewhere, so long as everything is going well. However, if things do not go well, then what we must pay attention to will no longer be a matter of choice. For all of us, this planet has seemingly been here forever. It is a constant context and backdrop of our entire life, for everyone, since humanity began. Hominids have existed for at least 6 million years. Modern man, of which we are the most recent example, has been around perhaps for 100,000 years. Of that 100,000, we have writings that go back only for a small fraction of that time, 5,000 years. Aside from the scattered archaeological records from extinct civilization, structured observations of weather and natural phenomena have been recorded only for a few hundred years, not nearly enough time to paint a reliable picture of the degree to which nature can impose its will on our continued existence. Given the sheer number of extinct species of which we are aware that have over time died out from climatological disasters, pretending that we now have immunity from such obscure concerns is unwise. Indeed, the fact that some civilizations that are no longer with us might well be attributable to changing climate. Since it is becoming more and more obvious that human activity can profoundly impact Earth itself, including the atmosphere and the oceans, perhaps we should, if we can manage it, avoid pouring gasoline on the fire. In the modern industrial era in which we find ourselves today, the words famine, flood, plague, drought, or pestilence seem somehow distant or archaic, something vague that happened in the distant past or someplace far away. But over the past few years, weather-related events that are quite destructive and involve mass fatalities seem to be cropping up more and more. They intrude into our world in various ways, sometimes through news media, but also by the need to change our travel arrangements or stock up on necessities. For those trying to focus on other priorities in life, such as getting to work or planning a vacation, this might become somewhat annoying. For those planting crops or needing to evacuate their homes, it might be a different story altogether. If food goes away, for example, that could be very inconvenient. Perhaps we should stick our heads up and start looking around. Is this something new? Why doesn't it just go away? These questions are what convinced me to start this channel. The primary purpose of this channel will be to make available to you a new resource for understanding what is going on with this apparent upsurge in serious weather events that is now beginning to show up more and more in news or social media reports. These could very well result in newly discovered and disturbing threats to our food supply, or even our personal safety. In addition to opening up a better understanding of what is happening in real time, I will show you what is being done to confront these problems and what options you have to take action that contributes to finding workable solution, not only for you, but for your loved ones and your community. My intention is to provide a resource with credible, scientifically backed information. Chemicals and other human-caused pollutants and contaminants have been escaping into our environment for decades. The period known as the Second Industrial Revolution, approximately 1870 to 1914, was an economic miracle for our entire culture. But there is no free ride. We are now experiencing the dark side of that miracle. As a result, there is already some work being done throughout the U.S. and the world to address these particular problems. However, there is much more to be done. For example, little is known about the long-term effects of chemicals and nanoplastics leaching from plastic products as they decompose in our homes and in the wild. We don't yet know the full range of long-term health impacts or what options exist to reverse their spread throughout the planet and within our own bodies. In many cases, we have not uncovered the damage that has already occurred. Likewise, we are just beginning to address long-term effects of greenhouse gases in addition to toxic air contaminants. The effects are planet-wide and are not just limited to impacts on living organisms, but also on the atmosphere and food production around the world. This channel will present information about impacts that are already occurring. A big part of what this channel is about is looking at the question of whether it is possible to do anything about the weather, or the environment as many people see it. It is a half-joking truism in our culture that everyone talks about the weather, but nobody ever does anything about it. Recently, however, some would no longer see this as being a laughing matter. Why do we really need to take action? In the age of industrialization, Human societies have gotten themselves to the point where they can create their own shelter, develop food resources, and build infrastructure so that daily life is much less impacted by the vagaries of weather than, say, humans in the days of our hunter-gatherer existence. To be fair, there are some big questions that come up in connection with the need to take action. First, how do we know things will not suddenly and miraculously reverse course? Second, how do we know that these are things for which humanity has some responsibility for causing? Are they not inevitable? Finally, in a similar vein, how do we know that humanity can even take any kind of action that will change the foreseeable outcome? If we are talking about the whole world, how can any collection of individuals suddenly stop these trends in their tracks? Perhaps our time is better spent saving our tax dollars and prepping survival bunkers. When the situation is unclear, having difficulty picking a course of action is a natural response for human society. Unfortunately, failing to take any action in the face of a potential Armageddon, by far, is the greatest risk. Yes, taking action based on incomplete information has its own costs and its own risks, but that does not always mean the way forward is futile. If concerted effort is put into assessing the context, establishing relationships, and determining cause and effect, humanity does have a successful track record in finding ways to mitigate risk and maximizing survivability. You may have noticed we are still here. It should also not be ignored that there is a long track record of those who claim taking effective action is pointless, as a way of hiding out or avoiding contributing to the collective effort for some other reason. Just remember that naysayers have no inherent validity. They need to back up their assertions the same as everyone else. If you say something is pointless, where is your proof? What studies can you show? It certainly looks like some of these events might be beyond human control. Maybe not. But if they are as dangerous as they appear, we need to find out what can be done. Now would be a good time to start, since it is very unclear how soon things could become really deadly or irreversible. Actually, the biggest problem, which may ultimately prove fatal, is inaction. This starts with inaction at the individual level, but inevitably leads to inaction at societal and governmental levels. It may come from simply being unaware of how much contamination is actually going on. Bad actors are not likely to be out in public advertising their true agenda. But a bigger concern is the lack of interest on the part of the population as a whole. Humans do frequently take action when a risk is perceived. But the reality is that unless it is perceived as an immediate threat, it is deprioritized in favor of other necessities such as food, shelter, and clothing. Raising public awareness in and of itself may eventually lead to the adoption of social norms that can help protect and defer threats to some degree. But sometimes making substantial investments or imposition of collective regulatory structures are ultimately necessary to reach a level where measures are actually effective. Without information available as to the existence of a significant threat, governments are not likely to motivate themselves to impose constraints or raise revenues to implement protective measures. A big incentive for me to take on creating this channel is the frustration that I have felt about a number of things. First is the lack of information available through mainstream media, or through readily accessible public sources, about the wide variety of events that are now starting to occur, the likely causes, the relationship to past or current human activity, the implications and potential risks, what options exist for individuals or organizations to take on mitigating adverse effects and changing direction to avoid future consequences. Second is the hostility and concerted effort from many segments of our society, for whatever motives, to actually undercut or thwart any actions that people might take to protect themselves, their loved ones, and their future. Third is the profound inability of people and organizations ostensibly concerned about the environment and the future of the planet, and who ought to know better, to agree to all work toward a common goal of discovering and implementing effective actions that keep us moving in the direction of heading off a clear impending threat. There is absolutely no room for bad faith, self-serving agendas, or mutual obstruction when it comes to finding any and all reasonable and effective science-based solutions. There is simply not time left for squabbling. Another focus of this channel will be to examine ongoing human activities that are adding new, significant threats to the existing ones. In theory, all of these activities should readily be discoverable. The reality is that there are many potentially harmful activities being undertaken that are not yet a matter of public knowledge, or have not yet triggered a meaningful response at the governmental level. Unless investigative work is funded, monitoring is put in place, and regulatory structures are implemented, we will never ever get ahead of the curve in implementing remedies for these new threats. What then is the path that leads toward finding workable solutions? There are a lot of competing factors to consider, and some are more important than others. Some of the bigger ones are global scale of impacts, direct threat to human life, cumulative and compounding effects, irreversibility of tipping points. Taking these factors into account, this channel's initial focus will be on the impacts of greenhouse gases and the threat of irreversible climate impacts. Much is already known about the causes. Valid scientific evidence reveals to us the predictable, vast scope and irreversible nature of the consequences. Only the exact timing is undetermined. For example, the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, or AMOC, is an ocean current system that distributes stored heat around the planet. If it collapses, as feared, due to the consequences of atmospheric warming, it will likely severely impact a huge segment of the industrialized world, and could easily go far beyond that. How far is something we really don't want to find out. This is a big deal. Based on current trends, the likelihood of this happening within one generation is already at unacceptable levels. This situation is unworkable for ultimate survival of our current living situation. We ourselves are facing a Darwinian moment. The bridge ahead is out. If individuals, communities, and advocacy groups most directly interested in solving these problems cannot find a way to all be pulling in the same direction, what hope is there that a consensus will ever develop within government or society at large? The goal of this channel is to explore all viable options that will lead to a result of returning atmospheric levels of greenhouse gases to pre-industrial levels. It is a survival-based concern. This is an all-hands-on-deck moment, and protracted arguments over whose solution is more ideologically pure or the most cost-effective will drive the train into a canyon. All reasonably cost-effective and viable solutions must be explored in parallel, so long as they do not physically or kinetically negate one another. Obviously, this way of thinking is not a consensus view within our prevailing global mindset. Up until now, at the level of cultural awareness, we have not had enough information to be truly present to risk, or that taking effective action might be critical to long-term survival. We have had the luxury of not thinking about that until now. But now, how do we start? Where do we go? What do we look for? This is the inquiry that I hope to begin with this channel. Even though the recent impacts of greenhouse gases are finally starting to come into public awareness, we will also be addressing many other concerns, some of which have not yet made it into the glare of media obsession. I am not worried about finding subject matter that can be covered on this channel. In closing, I need to let you know that I will be unable to produce content on a fixed schedule. It all depends on availability of financial resources, credible information, knowledgeable guests, community support, and production resources. In the future, I expect to open other methods of communication through social media. I am committed to keeping you informed frequently. In the next several episodes on this channel, I will be examining background effectiveness and future potential of emissions reduction as a viable strategy for addressing present and future greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. If this topic holds some interest for you, you can keep in touch by subscribing and hitting the like button below. If you turn on notifications by clicking on the bell icon next to that button, you will be notified when the next video is uploaded. This should be helpful since episodes are not going to be appearing on a fixed schedule. Finally, to support expansion of our concerned community, please share this video, and thank you for your time and your concern. As they say in legacy media, stay tuned.